And we are back live with another Between the Pages book chat. And today, my guest is fantasy author Aaron Hodges, and he's here to talk about his Descendants of the Fall series. So I'll turn it over to him now and let him introduce himself. Take it away.
Oh yeah, as you said, I'm Aaron Hodges. I'm an author from down under in New Zealand, actually. I'm not usually living here, but for the pandemic and everything, I've moved back home and come to live in the little tranquil oasis in the middle of a bit of a chaotic year. And yeah, I've been writing fantasy for about 5 years now, sorry. And this latest series has been my project for the year, Descendants of the Fall, as you said.
Okay, so give everyone a quick overview of the series, what it's about.
Yeah, so it's set in a fallen world. I'd like to say it's used to be the legends say it used to be a utopia, but one day where the humans live amongst the gods. But one day some humans betrayed the gods and stole their magic, and that led to them a new breed of human with magic, strength, and speed coming into existence, and that led to the gods throwing down the entire world and leaving for the mountains to live in isolation. And the series is set 500 years later, where humanity is now at war with that other species of humans that stole the magic of the gods, and they're losing quite badly because, well, it's normal humans against basically super strong versions of themselves that don't have much mercy. And so it focuses on a few main characters. The first one is a young man called Lucas, who is sent to the front lines to sort of defend his nation, but he doesn't really have any training or experience and gets thrown into the deep end. The second character is a man called Romain, who's quite a veteran warrior. For the last 10 years, he was fighting to defend his kingdom, but eventually they lost against the Tangata, the other species of human, and were driven back beyond the River Elmore into the bordering kingdom. So he now fights on, but most of his kingdom has fallen and most of his people are dead. And when Lucas encounters him, he sort of sees this giant of a warrior that he sees as maybe his only chance to learn to become a warrior himself and survive this frontline battle. And the last character is a woman called Erica, who's an archivist for the Queen, and she believes the secret to defeating the Tangata lies in the past and these artifacts and these hidden places where that remain from the time when humanity lived beside the gods, and she believes she can find some artifact or ancient powers that might be able to defeat the Tangata. So she begins with a bit far off from the front lines, a bit removed from the other characters, digging in the ruins of an old ancient site of the gods.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more about the main characters, their personalities, flaws, good traits.
Yeah, so Lucas is a interesting character I found because he's actually from the island nation of Perfusia, and for the entirety of the war, they've been quite removed from the battle, removed from the fight. They're safe on their island, but they've still signed up to be part of the alliance, so they still have to send their people to join with the other kingdoms to fight the Tangata to play their part. And what they are told when Lucas and his fellow recruits are set off from the island is that they've been honoured. They're some of the most honoured of their generation. They were selected from their academy to go to the front lines to prove the worthiness of their country. But when they arrive, it actually turns out they're a bit of a joke, and everyone in the other kingdoms know that the Perfugians at Ascent are actually the worst of the recruits, and they don't really know anything. They failed their classes and everything, and have just been sent off to basically remove them from the island society, as they think of them as wasted space, wasted resources, basically. So Lucas kind of has to come to terms with that. Not only have they been sent to the front lines to die, they've been sent because they were unworthy, essentially, according to their leaders. And so he struggles with that, and a lot of his companions basically are burdened and brought down by this whole realization, and Lucas has the choice to either give up and admit that he's probably going to die there, or find a way to survive. And so he and several of his friends end up going to Romaine and convincing him to help them. And Romaine's a bit of a gruff character. He lost his family at the start of the war. His wife and son were some of the first victims of the Tangata, so of the latest war at least. And so he has quite a hatred for them, and his only real goal in life is to kill as many of them as possible before he dies. And yet he keeps surviving because he's such a great warrior, and also quite lucky in a lot of times. And then Erica herself is a little bit more of a different character. She's grown up in the Queen's court, and so she doesn't really fit in with the others. She's a bit more arrogant and has this goal in life where she's going to become a noble of the Queen's court and win the Queen's favor by making these discoveries and things. But then to actually make those discoveries, she has to really get in on face danger and things, which is actually something a lot of nobles and stuff at the court would never really be willing to do. So she's a bit of an enigma.
It sounds like you have some nice contrast between the characters.
I like to have a few different ones.
Yeah. So, what were your reasons and inspirations for writing the series?
One of my big inspirations was the series of Ian Irvine, where he actually writes a lot of work around different cultures and different species of humans as well, more of an intra-world series. And I always thought that was quite interesting to have a different species of humans or characters with a different viewpoint of the world and that look at the world quite differently. So not only have I got the two species of humans, I've also tried to have the kingdoms quite separate in how they live. So, for instance, the Perfugians have this idea of perfection in their society, and that they don't cut down their trees, for instance. They're very exclusive, very isolated, whereas the Kalafi are more of a nomadic kingdom, more of a nomadic culture. Except for their main capital, they mostly live in villages and travel between villages and spend their winters in cottages and their summers roaming, hunting, and so on. And then the Flumerans have been preparing for the war most of their lives for generations, so they're quite a war-like culture that's been kind of preparing and uniting under their queen for years. And so their characters tend to be more serious and more warlike, more and that sort of thing.
Okay, so what about your enhanced humans? I mean, how does their powers and their magic work?
So it's more of an intrinsic magic. So there's a few different types of magic. For starters, the archivist does find an artifact quite early in the series that gives her the power to basically a gauntlet, essentially, that can give her the power to on the low end it can light up darkness in rooms and things, but then on the great end, if she points it, she can bring people to their knees and sort of kill with her fingers without ever touching somebody. So that's sort of one of the more magical artifacts. The Tangata themselves are more of a traditional. They have super strength and are very quick and fast and have a greater endurance than your average human, but they can't speak. So that's one thing that humans have never been able to negotiate with them, because they can't speak or communicate. And so they're more thought of as more of a monsters rather than humans, even though they obviously have more to them that meets the eye, and there's more to them than humanity necessarily knows even after generations of war or fraught dealings with them.
Okay, that's an interesting point that they can't speak. So why did you add that characteristic?
I thought it would make it more interesting with their interactions with the humans and be quite a contributor to why these two species of people have been at war for the last 10 years at the very least, but on and off for generations, to have these wars. And yeah, I thought it would be an interesting way to conceal a lot of features of what their actual culture and society is about as well. They have a form of communication, but the characters don't know that until the end of the first book.
Okay, no, that's very interesting twist, I think. So, what was the hardest scene or type of scene for you to write in the series?
Just for myself, the hardest scenes are the ones where there's a big twist, or mostly when there's a big twist, and trying to make sure it all fits together in the context of the whole book, and in the context of the different characters and the plots and the world, so that even though that twist is there right from the start, that you're making sure you're writing in hints at it and little ideas, so that for me, it's really important when I make a reveal or a plot twist that there's hints to it. And say if you were to reread the book and go back, you'd be like, oh, I see. It was always hinting at that, and it was always there, but you just don't realize it until the moment that the characters realize it, for the most part. And so I find that can be quite a difficult scene when it finally comes to the scene, to make sure that it flows well and gets on with the reveal without overdoing it, but also to make sure people do understand what the big change has been.
Yeah, that can be tricky. All right. So, what is your favorite scene or favorite type of scene that you wrote in the series?
I quite like the. Well, I will say I really do actually enjoy writing the twist scenes as well. But I quite enjoy the scenes where it seems as though the characters are in a lot of trouble, and that they basically, there's no way out and no way for them to survive, and where characters are really forced to step up and discover how great they can be and what they're capable of, and to really face their fears or weak shortcomings and overcome them. And so I really enjoy those scenes.
Okay, so are any of your secondary characters a little quirky, or do they tend to steal the scenes?
Yeah, so there is one other character that's more of a secondary character in the first book, called Kara, and Romain actually saves her. He's on a scouting trip in the north, and they come across this young woman that's being chased by Tutangata, and because the north is, or the south, should I say, is actually where that's actually used to be Romain's kingdom. He assumes she's one of his people that was left behind during the evacuation, essentially. And they don't really know how she survived out there, other than that they're very nomadic people and used to surviving on their own. So she comes back to the city, and she's quite quirky in the fact that she's lived her entire life in the wilderness, essentially, and now finding her in this big city, she's quite interesting in how she interacts with other characters, and the city itself and the people all around her, and the different cultural things that she comes to learn, and even just interactions with people can be quite interesting with her, because, well, she doesn't have that many of them.
Okay, so what are your characters afraid of?
Well, most of them, the Tangata for starters, especially Lucas, when they basically come under attack their first day they arrive at the fortress. So he finds himself confronted with these creatures that have basically been told in nightmares and bedtime tales since birth, and discovers they're actually much worse than all the tales, and much more terrifying, and there's no way they, with what they know, they would be able to fight them. So he is quite terrified that he's going to die that first day. I would say Romain himself is less afraid of the Tangata and more afraid of actually bonding and with someone new, with new people, and losing them, since he's lost his family and many friends over the years to the Tangata, to the war. So when Lucas first approaches him, he's kind of very reluctant to accept this new responsibility and accept these new people into his life. But along with Kara and Lucas, they kind of wile their way into his heart, and he in the end accepts that he has some responsibility with them, and then realizes when they do eventually travel south of the river again with the group, with the company of these recruits he's been training, that he's actually more afraid of failing them than he is of failing the of dying himself.
Interesting. So you're obviously a fantasy writer, but are there any other genres you've dabbled in, or ones you'd like to dabble in?
Yeah, I've written in a dystopian sci-fi before, which was set in a future America where that had a civil war, and it's a dictatorship is now ruling the West Coast, and it's sort of quite a fun series. It also features genetic experimentation and different dystopian characteristics, and I had a lot of inspiration from Argentina's history, actually, where I lived for a year and for a few months also before I wrote this book. So drawing off their history of disappeared peoples and disappeared children and things, I really found that fascinating and thought it was a story that deserved some sort of focus, and also drawing inspiration on how they defeated their dictatorship and how they actually what actually brought them down. For instance, was a group of older women whose children had disappeared along with their grandchildren, and they knew that their children were probably dead, but a lot of these babies had actually been adopted out to supporters of the dictatorship, and they knew their grandchildren were still alive, and they were actually formed a very center part of the movement against the dictatorship. And in my books, I drew on that disappeared people, except the children were taken away to be experimented on, more Nazi Germany kind of thing. So then later in the series, I also drew on the Mad Mothers, as they were called in Argentina, and sort of wanted to incorporate part of their story and how ordinary people can bring down a dictatorship just by standing up to them.
Interesting. So what's the series name?
That's the Evolution Gene trilogy.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. Sounds interesting. So I think we'll wrap it up here, and we'll let you tell everyone where they can find you and your books.
Great. Yeah. Well, you can find me on Facebook. I have a Facebook group, Fantastic Adventures. And you can also find me on my website, aaronhodges.co.nz, or, of course, on Amazon. If you look up Aaron Hodges, Descendants of the Fall, or The Evolution Gene, or any of my other fantasy series, I should be there.
Great. Thank you for being here today. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
And Between the Pages Book Chat, we'll be back next weekend with 2 more authors, so join us then. And that's all for now, so bye.